Bee Talks, and I'm so glad you're all here. Thank you all for coming. There's a bunch of regulars here and some new people, and so welcome to you all. And I hope you have a pleasant holiday season going forward. We will start our bee school this year on second Saturday in January and go to the first four sessions, successive sessions, and we'll go to the end of the first week in February. So that's when it'll end. So it's 3 weeks in January, week 2, 3, and 4, and then the first week in February. They're all on Saturday. They're all 10 o'clock in the morning. We have a great lineup of speakers. So if you are thinking about joining, please register on our site. You'll see a little flashing box as soon as you go to ctbees.org, and you can sign up for our bee school and learn a little bit about bees. So anyway, we have a great lineup too, a speakers lineup coming in. We have what I think a person that is the premier queen breeder in the United States, maybe in the world. Her name is Dr. Sue Kobe. I've met her a few times at meetings. She's one of the most approachable people I know of in this bee breeding area. So she's on for February 20th, and you register for that talk. Of course, the talk will be recorded, and for those of you who are members, you'll be able to get at that recording and see it if you miss it. But anyway, she's at 6:30 on February 20th. Great person to listen to. Then we have Michelle Flanagan coming up in March 26th. You'll see her in the events. And then we have following her, and she's going to talk about the impact of Varroa viruses that Varroa vector into honeybees, and she will be on again at 6:30 on the March 26th. And then we have Crispin Given, who was going to talk a little bit about behavioral resistance to Varroa. So he's going to, I think, be talking about bees that bite the legs off of Varroa and all that in a natural kind of way for them to combat Varroa. So got a nice lineup of speakers, and we have more after that. I'm just giving you the first 3 in 2025, and we'll go from there. So that's sort of the introduction, and we're here tonight in what has finally become winter, and but it's been a very difficult temperature profile through November. From what I'm hearing on the survey front is that this has been a big year already for bee loss. So somewhere in the area of 50%. So it's really surprising that here we are approaching a year where we are pretty versed in the ability to be able to care for the pests that are in our colony. We know how to treat for Varroa. We know what to do for small hive beetle. Wax moth aren't really a problem. Tracheal mites are making a little bit of resurgence, but for the most part, we have the pests we know of under some kind of management practice. So why would we lose 50% of the bees? I mean, these are big commercial beekeepers who use what I would consider extraordinary measures to take care of their bee problems. But they do a good job of, because it's their livelihood, they do a good job of keeping the Varroa counts down, but yet they're losing bees the same way. So I guess I'm mentioning that so you feel a little bit better about your own bee losses, that it could be just environmental this year. For some reason, the temperature profile got together in early fall. The bees used lots of resources that they wouldn't use, but, we're losing a lot of bees. And we lost a lot of bees, I guess, nationwide during the summer too. So it's a very, very interesting phenomenon that's occurring this year. So we'll see where this goes.
Hey, Bill, there's a question in there from real quick from Gail. Her bees are clumping on the top of her frames, or on the top of my hive bodies, on the fondant. I fed them, but more and more are gathering. What is this?
Well, I think Gail, they're just eating the fondant. I mean, that's why they're there. They're up on that and eating it. I mean, now, if you're thinking that might be an indication that they don't have any stores left at this point, that you can tell by lifting up the box and seeing how much it weighs. So, if Gail, if you want to chime in and clarify what you mean by that, but otherwise they would just be eating that fondant because they need it.
So Bill, they're actually, I have the Hive Alive fondant that's in the plastic thing, and it's like
Oh,
not a
okay,
lot.
that's a real, so that's like a soft fondant, right?
That's
It's not hard,
no, it's not hard sugar.
not cooked fondant, yeah. Mm,
Yeah, I just had it and wanted to use it up.
all right, so they're eating it, I think.
No, these particular
Oh, they're not eating it.
they're not eating a lot of it, so I figured maybe they didn't like it. So I've been like running around today trying to make some candy boards for them.
Well, candy boards meaning cooking the sugar to high to softball stage,
No, no, I'm doing raw ones.
just sugar cakes.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're on top of the fondant, you're saying.
right.
Yeah, and they're not eating it.
Well, some of it's gone, but there's still plenty of it.
All right, so I mean, you can do what you want there. You can take it off and put on your own sugar cakes and see what happens. But did you look at the under on the bottom of that fondant and where you would be clear if they're not eating it?
Well, I could sort of see the package, like the edges of the package. When I first this particular hive, when I first was looking, they had like an 8 to 9 inch circle on top of the fondant, which is about the size of the package. A couple days later, it was more like 12 inches. Today it was huge. So
So this fondant, so I'm not familiar with this fondant product that you're using that you leave the packaging on when you put it in the colony
yeah, and you cut a circle
in the top.
in the top. I think I cut a circle on both sides.
Yeah, okay.
That made sense to me, and I usually snip the corners off because they like, they like that.
So you're saying that the bees are on that fondant. I think they're eating it, but maybe
Yeah,
not. Who
but
knows?
I guess not enough for.
I don't know. I don't know about that. So they'll eat as much as they need. Um, yeah, I don't really know what that what's going on there, Gail. I really can't tell.
Or they don't like it, so I'm feeding
Maybe
them.
they don't like it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that the answer to that. All right, so let's just take one step backward for a minute there, Gare, and we'll get to those other questions that are in there. I just wanted to mention that probably your bees, as far as the bloom calendar goes, which we normally discuss at the beginning of every bee talks, there's really nothing that I see or can even imagine bees would be foraging on in this weather. I don't think we hit 50 degrees again next week until later, and even then it would probably be some inclement weather, so bees wouldn't be flying. So there's really nothing out there for them to get. So the only thing bees can get at this point is whatever you give them or whatever that was stored in the colony. So it's not really that much of a tragedy that they can't fly this time of year and forage for anything, because they will have, if they built in a sort of classic pattern before the fall, they would have put up stores of honey and a little bit of pollen. Now, the pollen that they put up, they don't need as much pollen in the colony as they would with queen rearing, with brood rearing, but there will be some that they can eat during the period that they're in the colony for the winter, but they don't really go after bee bread that much in the wintertime. As a matter of fact, those stores stay pretty much stagnant all winter. Their primary focus in the winter is to consume carbohydrate, which would be in the form of either honey or, as Gail is doing, feeding something, some kind of a fondant mixture or a sugar cake or something like that, if in fact they actually need it. Now, we've gotten away from the old habit of just using our supplemental feedings under situations or conditions when they're needed. So somehow or another, the meaning of emergency food has been lost in the way we currently treat bees in our modern times. All we ever used to do was feed fondant or any of those substances when the bees actually needed it. And the way we figured that out was to what sort of heft the colony and get a weight on it when it was going into winter and then monitor that weight. And if the weight was significantly less at some point, we determined that bees may be really going through their stores quickly, then we would put on emergency food. But right now, it seems like we're actually putting on emergency food right from the beginning. And, there's no harm in it, but it may not be necessary because you don't have to feed your bees in the winter if they're prepared well enough in the fall. So your winter feeding starts with fall preparation. So just keep that in mind for next year, when you're thinking about how you will get your bees ready for the winter time. It actually happens in the fall, right? So you feed them out then, is what I'm saying. Anything else, Gary?
Yes, Bill, there's a question in there that says, what's the minimum temperature for treating hives with OA?
Oxalic acid in what form? Vaporization or,
I'm assuming vapor.
okay, vapor.
Yes.
So vapor would be, there isn't one. The issue with vapor, it's vapor and it has to penetrate the cluster. So as the temperature goes down in our colonies at night, especially this time of year, when it stays consistently below, say, 32 degrees or something, the cluster gets pretty tight. And if you were to go and vaporize that colony at that low temperature, even if it's a daytime temperature below freezing or close to freezing, the question is whether or not you would get enough penetration through that cluster, because it wouldn't be as porous as it is at 50 degrees set. So what I like to do if I'm going to vaporize colonies in the winter, I want to wait until the temperature is in the high 40s or low 50s, where the cluster will begin to loosen up a little, which will give it more porosity, right? So it'll be porous at that point. And then the vapors, I assume at that point, the vapors will penetrate the interior part of the cluster thoroughly and kill varroa that are on the surface of bees. Now folks do dribbles in the winter. I wouldn't suggest that. I just can't see doing that. Putting liquid formula of liquid acid and sugar syrup on my bees in the wintertime. I just wouldn't do it. But I do put on I will do oxalic acid vapor. So there's really no low temperature, but I would say that you got to get them to where they're like a little bit of an open cluster.
Excellent. So the next question comes from Michelle. Hi, Bill. I've read the honeybee biology book by Dewey Karen. Can you suggest another book about bee biology that would be a little bit more in depth?
Well, you've got the whole series of books by Tom Seeley. You can read Honeybee Democracy and all of those books. So he's written like 4 or 5 books. I think he has 7 out now, and they explain biology and behavior. Now the iconic book for bee biology is not Dewey's book, unfortunately. It's Mark Winston's book, by The Biology of the Honeybee. That is the book that if you want more depth about biology, that's the book for you to buy. And it's by Mark Winston. We had him here as a guest speaker.
There's another question, actually, an interesting comment from Doug C. Surprised to see a decent amount of capped brood in my observation hive today. It wasn't a question, but I found that interesting.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, that is an interesting question. So, Doug, that's probably because your observation hive is inside, and the bees think it's not winter, right? So they're not going to fly out because they know it's cold outside, but they can maintain brood. And it is December 12th, which would be the beginning of brood rearing, is in a few days around the winter solstice. And that's when your queen will begin to lay with some regularity. So right now, that brood is probably a holdover from, a colony that didn't find its way to get into winter state because it's inside. I think it's inside. Is that right?
He's saying his speaker doesn't work right now, but he's saying yes, all stages of eggs and larva.
Yeah.
Yes, inside. He says
Yeah.
yes, inside. Yep.
That's fine, yeah. Yeah, that's the reason why.
There's a question by Ryan. How do you weigh or pick up the hive to gauge the weight to measure stores without chilling the hive? I'm always afraid to mess with the hive in winter.
Well, you're not, okay, Ryan, a good question, thank you. By the way, I always forget to say that. I mean, the convention these days is to compliment everybody on their question, but I really appreciate these questions. They're all really great questions. If I forget to tell you that, it's only because I'm interested in answering your question and not because I don't think it's a good question. So you don't weigh it, you pick it up by hefting it. So you go around the back and you find a handhold, under the bottom board or something, and you lift it. Or you can have a scale like Peter has, and I know Peter's on this call somewhere, and Peter will explain how he uses his scale, I hope. But anyway, you can do it by hand. So you're not chilling the hive at all. You're just picking it up with your hand. And then you do that during periods, at 3-week intervals over the winter time. And if that was the only way we used to do it. And so if you heft it up before we had scales, you would have to and feel and figure it out. It's getting lighter, they're using their stores. Yeah, you're right to be afraid of messing with your colonies in the winter. They don't like you doing that. So Peter, explain for Ryan and the rest of us how your scale works. Or maybe you can show us some.
Okay. Yep, I can do that. Okay, so this is one of my, I have only 2 hives, but I do have sensors on them. These are obviously broodminder sensors. So I'm kind of glad you asked this question because I had a question. But I guess, and this is over 30 days, I guess you could see the weight doesn't change much this time of year.
Yeah.
Now, I can't really explain why there's these little, why it would go up. I had stopped feeding them by this point. And in the middle of the day, it reaches these higher points. And I don't know, Bill, I'm not exactly sure why that happens.
Yeah. Okay. So what's the points are regularly in the daytime?
It looks like if I take some of these,
Yeah, let's take a look at a few of those.
yeah, it looks like, 239, 139. Yeah, so they're like mostly in the middle of the afternoon sometime, late afternoon.
All right.
So I don't know if it's
And what's the difference in the
moisture.
weight?
And then the difference in the weight is, well, I take, for example, that's 110 at the high point and 104. So that's a lot, it seems like.
Mhm.
And I don't know if it's condensation in the middle of the day. I was going to ask that question.
Yeah. So we got a question in front of us that's kind of interesting and mysterious at the same time. So you're finding, if you go way over to the left of those charts, there's some more even peaks. What do they read, Peter? Way over on the right side. Yeah, those.
When you say what
Yeah,
they,
what are those times? Yeah, what are those times during the day?
well, again, it's usually around noon or shortly thereafter.
Okay.
So 11:37 p.m. in the afternoon, and then the low point is more like, well, the next morning, and then again 1:37, and then 4:41 early in the morning. So that seems to be pretty consistent.
So this is a very good question. I have no idea what's going on here.
Oh, could I interject?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have broodminders too. Peters, are these the old W1 scales? The bar in the back and the
Yes, so I have.
okay. I have 2 of those, and I have 4 of the new ones, which have the 4 load cells. And what you are seeing here is exactly the same thing I see on the older broodminder scales. And I think what we're seeing here, perhaps, is a thermal expansion that's going on.
In
And
the
on the
center,
bright sunny days, warm days, you see the high peaks. And if you look to the right, the last few days over on the other side, December 9th and so on, you see that those peaks sort of disappear. Well, those were the days we've been getting the rains and the cloudiness. So I think what you're seeing is characteristic of the scale itself, more than anything is going on inside the hives. The way I monitor my scales is to pick a time. I pick 3 o'clock in the morning, and I pull the weights off at 3 o'clock in the morning, and then you can start seeing trends, I think.
Okay. What are the new sensors? How do the new sensors read?
They stay pretty flat.
All right, so
It's-
the characteristic of the electronics in the earlier scale then.
Yeah, I believe so, Bill.
Okay, all right, that's a good explanation. I mean, you probably can bet the
Yeah, with the new version, the W3 scales, I really don't see any fluctuation at all, and they
Okay.
hold very steady.
yeah, they must have.
And I can detect changes in the tenths of a pound.
So there you go. So really, because it's a really perplexing problem, if you're looking at just this scale and don't understand the characteristics of that electronics in that broodminder, you would look at this and say, there's no way that, there's substances in the colony that can change. So
Yeah, and you're right.
yeah. So there you go. All right. So that answers that, Peter. So that's another way that you can join the modern age and monitor the weight of your hives. And I encourage you, if you're at all interested in this and you have the disposable income to purchase one of these things and try it out, it's just a whole lot of fun. You get a chance, you're looking at that biology, and a lot of it makes real sense. I mean, when Peter has shown other graphs he's had for humidity and all that, we could actually discern, reasonable trends, like when a lot of nectar comes in the colony and then the bees thin it and then the colony loses weight overnight. I mean, so it's like you can have a lot of fun with them. So try it. All right, thanks, Peter.
What's your opinion of heated bottom boards for the winter? Do
Well,
you have any experience with those?
well, I've seen some that were manufactured that local suppliers were building and trying to sell. And I don't think they're a good idea. Those are not UL approved. It requires, running electrical wires out, extension cord. I'm an electrical contractor, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask this. But to me, it's dangerous. It's assuming that have but if you had a lot of outdoor outlets and they were protected and you had the right, kind of extension cord to go into them, you probably could use, a heated bottom board. Your bees don't need it, but all your bees really need is side and top insulation, a continuous sheathing of it, and then you're fine. Bees can survive in our version of a temperate climate way down until the negative numbers, so they don't really need heat. And if you put heat on them, and I've seen people put 40-watt light bulbs in colonies, I've seen them use that heated bottom board, which I totally disagree with, by the way it's manufactured. You don't really see many heated bottom boards coming out of, I don't think Better Bee or Man Lake or any of them sell a heated bottom board. But you could try it, see what happens. But I suggest you get one that has got some valid licensing behind it by the testing bureaus before you put it under your colony. It's a matter of whether or not it'll electrocute you. That's what I'm thinking about. But so again, I don't think you need it.
Bill, I know that you run in your bee yard, you run some of the, in lack of a better word, styrofoam hives.
Yeah.
How, I just recently, my dad and I were trading some emails about a video we saw on YouTube about how good they are, about, that they're selling a lot to commercial beekeepers. What's been your opinion using those?
Well, so the bee box that we've adapted and been told to use over the years is a commercial version. Actually, the original Langstroth box was, I think, modeled off of an orange crate that he had. And that orange crate happened to be about the same size as the Langstroth box is today. And he built removable frames in it. And there we go. From then on, now we have this Langstroth box. but it's generally a length box. You can criticize it in this way, that it's just for the commercial convenience of moving colonies around, and never really considered the thin 3/4 inch wooden box, never really considered the environmental factors that bees have been accustomed to living in. And that means that it's inadequate in terms of its insulation quality. And, we go forward with it in a mindless way in some respects, and then find that our bees die in them. So in the last, I would say 10 years, there was first a growing curiosity about trying to get bees to live in a more natural colony in terms of its insulation quality. And then in the last 5 years or so, it's taken off like crazy. And there's a whole market of products that are sold out there that will allow your bees to live in an environment that's closer to what they have become accustomed to living in over their, genetically accustomed to living in the million years or so that they've evolved using tree cavities for their homes. Right. So like, doesn't really matter much what you keep bees in Florida or in parts of Southern California, say, for instance, unless you have them in really hot climates and then you're heat stressing them. But for the most part, you can get away with an uninsulated box in the wintertime in those areas. But where we live, starting everywhere in the Midwest in a certain latitude, and of course, where we live here in Connecticut, it behooves you to provide insulation quality that the bees are accustomed to. Now, if you do that, you get a couple of advantages. If you remove the ventilation from the top of the colony, which is another unfortunate part of bee lore that's been passed down to us. If you remove that and you have a solid layer of insulation around the whole colony, they will condense the moisture that they expel from the metabolic processes of eating honey. So all year long during the winter, they'll eat honey. They will give off carbon dioxide and water vapor. And those two things are, those two elements are essential for bees to have in their colony in the wintertime. They use the carbon dioxide to regulate their metabolic structures. So if the carbon dioxide gets a little bit too high in the colony, they'll adjust by lowering their metabolic rate, right? So, and that's a purposeful adaptation, environmental adaptation to help them survive. Same thing with the condensation piece of it. If you allow their the vapor that comes off of them, the moist air that comes off of them, to rise through the cluster and hit a warm surface above them, meaning insulation, that warm surface will be kept above the dew point and condensation will not form on it. And then it will spread out over the top and form on cooler surfaces inside the box. And when that happens, it'll go from that vapor to a water droplet, and it gives off latent heat. So again, there is this heat recovery system built into the biology of bees that we have dismissed when we put a whole lot of thin box and a whole lot of ventilation, right? So that goes away. So they don't have that. Those water droplets that are inside the colony are available for bees when they can move through off the mantle and grab the mantle of the cluster, I'm saying, as it broadens out during periods when the temperature goes a little bit above freezing. They can grab those water droplets and use those water droplets inside the colony, either quench their thirst, which is a real problem for bees in the mantle and in the core of the cluster, but they can also use them to thin honey because they can't eat honey directly, they have to thin it, and that's available for them to do that. So it gives them a way to manage their colony. Well-insulated colony has, first of all, maintains a more even temperature profile inside, and bees love homeostasis, especially in terms of temperature. So so it does all of those things. It gives them a mechanism to feed themselves by using water droplets based on the condensation that occurs, and they get to regulate their hive gases. So lots of excellent stuff. I give a whole talk on that, and I'll give it to to our club at one point. But I talk about that really a lot.
Gail asked a question. I think you can probably wrap this one up in that conversation too, and that is there a downside to using quilts to absorb moisture?
Yeah, there is. There's a in my opinion, as I just mentioned, that moisture is necessary to leave in the colony, assuming that you insulate above the cluster. So that's a must, because if you don't do that, of course, that surface will be cold, and then the warm, moist air hitting that, it'll be below the dew point at that point, and the moisture in the air will condensate right above the cluster, form water droplets, and drip back down. That'll kill your bees. So what Quilt Box came into use without the advantage of having any science behind their operating modality. So we actually just adapted Quilt Boxes from worry hives. And in worry hives, they were used for something else, not absorbing moisture. They were used for heat retention. So it was a form of insulation. But what we've done is, and now here's where the equipment manufacturers got involved in selling you Quilt Boxes. We've stuffed them with materials with no actual scientific reasoning behind it that absorb moisture. So if you absorb the moisture, it's not available to the bees anymore. And that's the problem with the Quilt Box. So yeah, I leave that moisture in the colony, and bees will regulate those gases. If they need to clear moisture out of the constant, they'll ventilate it. If they need to move a little bit of CO2 out, they start to ventilate, but they only do it in little tiny measured portions. They don't provide any great way, they don't move moisture out in bulk, and they don't move carbon dioxide out in bulk either. They just do in small increments that allow them to regulate the hive gases in a natural biological way. So, and then the other thing about Quilt Boxes, if they get a lot of moisture in them, they freeze, and then you have a block of ice underneath. Because most people use a Quilt Box and then they put ventilation in, which is like crazy, because if you ventilate a Quilt Box, you're bringing it in, ultra cold ambient air, and you got a source of moisture there, it'll freeze. And folks noticed this when they put Humusol over the top of their boxes in the wintertime too, also thinking that that was a great way to absorb moisture, and then and add insulation. But of course it doesn't, because Humusol only has a half a R per inch, per half inch, so it's minimal amount of insulation, and it's made out of wood fiber. So as soon as it collects a little bit of moisture, it loses all of its R value, and it will turn into a block of ice in an extended winter with a lot of bees eating stores below it.
Bill, the next question comes from Manish. First time attendee. We bought a farm in Andover, Connecticut. We have no prior experience in farming or beekeeping. My wife and I are IT entrepreneurs. Please advise how newcomers like us can get started. Thank you. And Jean gave a great response, but I'll also let that question.
Okay, let's read Jean's response.
Jean's response was, CBA offers a course to help you learn. I'd also recommend I use it to get started beekeeping for dummies. It has step-by-step instructions for the first year. Also, I recommend you attend as many of the in-person demonstrations offered by the CBA. You will learn so much from seeing experienced people work in a beehive.
I agree with Jean. It's a great idea to come and come to our bee yard. So if you belong to the club, and I think you do, then you can ask for a mentor, apply for a mentor, get one, and keep bees with them for a while until you decide to go out on your own. It's a good idea to spend as much time as your patience will allow you to learn about bees and beekeeping at the expense of someone else, like your mentor or our hives at the bee yard.
And Ryan has a question similar to that. I use Claw's hive domes. What are your thoughts on them? I like
Yeah,
doing it again without much
I've never
disturbance.
used them, so ask us. Tell us, Ryan, what is it? Explain to folks what that is. I've never used one myself, but I see how they work. So what's your experience with them?
So I've used them. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
Oh,
Yep.
perfect. I'm sorry. So I've used them for 2 seasons now. Basically they just go, you put on a medium super. Well, you put this dome is made out of plexiglass so you can peer in, then you put a medium super over the top of it. So you can just pull the top cover off and peer in and see what they're up to. See, kind of
yeah,
look in, kind of like your plexiglass that I believe it seems like it's the same type of thought process. The only benefit here that I see is that it's domed. So if any condensation does build up, it just runs off the sides into the pretty much like past where all of the colony would be kind of clustered up.
yeah. Yeah, so that was the principle of it, that it would shed moisture to the outside frames. Now that you can allow that to happen naturally under the natural laws of thermodynamics just by insulating over the top of the colony.
There's no questions right now in the queue.
Okay, so that's kind of good in a way because I wanted to mention that we're trying to get this down to 60 minutes. This thing it goes on a little bit till 8 o'clock sometimes, but so if there aren't any more questions, I think we can leave it here, or you're free to ask more. Hold up your hand if you want, and hope to see you guys soon.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.